And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. My honor to have on today Dr. Bill Lile, also known as the ProLife Doc. And if you've never heard Dr. Lile give a presentation, it is always amazing. He talks about fetal surgery and is out promoting the sanctity of life all around the country. So Dr. Lile, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here and share some of this information.
And so Dr. Lile is actually a practicing doctor. In fact, he's in the office today, performing services as a doctor, but also speaks all around the country on the issue of the sanctity of life. And so I often start the podcast with just a favorite story or just a recent way that God has blessed you and your ministry. So Dr. Lile, if you'd share something with us there.
Sure. Well, my joy is I practice obstetrics and gynecology. I got into this because it was one of the few times where somebody is actually happy to go to the hospital. Nobody's happy when they have their gallbladder out or their appendix out, but when you're having a baby, you're happy and you have joy. And so that's what originally attracted me. But then, we've now gotten so involved in the life ministry, and one of my passions is reversing the effect of the abortion pill. More than half of all the abortions in the United States are now performed with the abortion pill. And we want people to make good decisions. So education is a very large priority, but also people make bad decisions. This is my 30th anniversary today. And I look back over those 30 years. Are there things that I've said that I'm like, why did I say that? Or things that I've done, I'm like, why did I do that? Sure, we all make mistakes. We all have regrets. And sometimes people have that regret in the form of taking the abortion pill. Well, it will kill a baby 98% of the time in the womb, up to 10 weeks gestation. But is there an antidote? Yes. Just like if somebody makes a bad decision and they take too much of a narcotic or fentanyl, we have an amazing antidote called Narcan, where we can absolutely reverse the effect of the narcotic and save that person's life. Well, when somebody makes a bad decision and they take the abortion pill, they a lot of times have regrets. And just 2 weeks ago, one of my first reversals of the abortion pill, that baby turned 5 years old. And I was sent a picture of this baby that I actually had the privilege of not only reversing the bad decision that the mom and the dad had made, that came to their senses actually in the parking lot of the abortion clinic. They contacted our network, contacted me. We called in the reversal medication. We were successful. We had a normal ultrasound a week later, a normal ultrasound 2 weeks later, and then we delivered that baby. Well, that baby, who had a 98% chance of dying, started kindergarten 2 weeks ago. So I got a picture of this beautiful little girl in her pink and purple outfit with her purple backpack, ready for her first day of school. And when you look back and I've delivered almost 4,000 babies, but the ones that had a 98% chance of dying, that with a little bit of medicine, a lot of prayer, you were able to save their life and see that beautiful little kid created in the image of God at that moment of conception, starting kindergarten in her little pink and purple outfit. Yeah, that brings you absolute joy.
So I'm chuckling just a little bit because I talk to individuals from time to time on, it's nice to see the fruits of your labor and to see, somebody come to Christ. That's, I think, the ultimate joy. And then sometimes we'll, in our work, we'll see a court opinion or maybe some legislation passed, and that can actually have the effect of saving babies. In fact, in the state of Indiana, passed an abortion ban. We know that it's saving thousands of children, and we know that already. But to have like the actual individual and to see that picture come back to you, imagine that must be an amazing feeling, and what a blessing. And and you've alluded to it already. I heard you give, I've actually heard you give two presentations at the Family Leader Summit in Iowa, and it was just blown away both times. And you have this just unique position in that you're not just an advocate, but you're also a practicing doctor and can bring that to bear into this space, but also just the joy with which you present, the humor. It's just such a persuasive presentation. And so I'm so glad to have you on today. We'd love to jump into how you mentioned getting into this area because it's the one part of medicine where people are happy to come in, which I could certainly see that. But what led you into specifically the the space on abortion. And my understanding is you joined a practice in 1999 and actually shut down abortion services and referrals. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that with us.
Sure. Well, I always had a passion for life, even before medical school. Grew up in New Jersey, and we were even active in a pregnancy resource center in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, when I was a kid. So we would go to the banquets. We were a supporter and always had a respect for life. And then when I chose to go into obstetrics, I had a whole new perception because these were my patients on the inside. And even 25 years ago, we weren't just looking at the babies in the womb, we were starting to treat the babies in the womb. And so the practice that I took over, a partner and I, he was actually had been the largest provider of abortions in the Florida Panhandle area, the largest provider, and his practice was kind of available. So we approached him and we said, we're interested in the practice. And we purchased the practice, took it over, had him sign a restrictive covenant, a non-compete, where after we took over the practice, he couldn't practice any form of medicine in our tri-county area for 2 years. So he used to perform abortions up on the second floor. So we met with the staff on day one. And the staff had been there, some of them for decades. And we said, look, it's nice to have you here. We're taking over. There are going to be a few changes. And the primary change is that we are not going to perform or refer any patients for abortions. And you're welcome to stay. We hope you do because you know these patients. And but if you do refer a patient or someplace else for an abortion, that would be grounds for termination. And every single patient or worker stayed with us. In fact, I
Wow.
still get emails from nurses who had been extremely involved in his performing of the abortions, had a change of heart, had a change of mind, actually felt a relief that we weren't going to be doing that
Wow.
anymore. And so that was how we really started. But then we thought that was pretty much all we were going to do. But then, it was on a Sunday after church when I actually went upstairs to where they used to perform the abortions, and I had never been upstairs, before. And I saw the abortion machine, all the
Oh, wow.
instruments laid out for the next Monday morning of abortion, the jar and the tubing. And I thought, we are on the same street as Pensacola Christian College. We have big mega churches on different corners of the
Wow.
city. We have lots of small churches. How has the church not been involved in shutting this down? So we did a presentation at my church, which led to another, which pretty much moved into a ministry within a couple of months. And now we will probably be out of state 40 to 50 times this year. And it's become our new focus in addition to the practice of medicine.
It's such a remarkable story of even just sharing with your employees and some of them being relieved that they didn't have to participate in that anymore. And I've heard you mention several times the statement, a patient is a person no matter how small. And I'd love for you to dig into that in a second. But on your website, and I've looked at opinion number 439 of the American College of Obstetricians, Gynecologists on informed consent. And I have always wondered, how do you, the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm, how does that square with it? And so I was just interested in kind of your opinion on that and why it's so overlooked, perhaps better word is ignored by doctors that do perform abortions.
Well, I would put it in the same category as we all take marriage vows, yet we have almost half of our marriage vows being compromised and ending in divorce. Yes, we take a Hippocratic oath, and some of the schools actually will allow their class to write their own oath, and it really varies. When you look
Hmm.
at the people who are performing the late term abortions, a lot of these are really highly skilled obstetricians who are, in fact, even maternal fetal medicine specialists, high risk specialists. So it's like, how can you heal, kids on Thursday and Friday and yet schedule somebody for an abortion on Monday? So that's why it's absolutely a spiritual battle when somebody has the knowledge and yet they still choose to terminate that life. One of the first things that we learn is what you had just quoted in Latin, prima non nocere, which is Latin for first of all, do no harm. And the second thing you learn
Hmm.
about is patience. rights, and that a patient is a person is entitled to respect and bodily integrity. And the ACOG statement that you mentioned earlier also talks about patients' rights. And even when patients can't communicate for whatever reason, as an advocate for patients' rights, you always have to think, what would the patient want in this
Mm.
situation? What is in the best interest for this patient? Well, we are clearly treating the preborn in the womb as patients, and not just with diagnostic tools, but actively performing procedures and saving their lives. Things as simple as we can now routinely perform blood transfusions directly to babies in the womb. Remember when Jesus was asked by a Pharisee, what is the greatest commandment? Thinking that he's going to trick Jesus into picking
Mhm.
one that's the greatest.
Yeah.
And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul, and your neighbor as yourself. Well, love your neighbor as yourself. If you donate blood at a local blood drive to give to somebody in your town, is that treating your neighbor as yourself? Yeah, you gave something from your body to save the life of somebody else. Well, if you have O negative blood, we can actually take the blood that you donated and we can inject it directly into the vasculature of a baby in the womb that is being attacked by its own mother, because from the moment of conception, they are genetically unique. Baby is genetically unique from mom, genetically unique from dad, genetically unique from the other 7 billion people on the planet. And sometimes moms will have antibodies which will attack the baby's blood, and it will actually lower the baby's blood count. And if we don't do something, the baby will die. We have done blood transfusions directly to babies in the womb as early as 18 weeks gestation. I mean, they
Wow.
can't even survive on the outside for another 6 weeks. But we're doing open heart surgery. Spina bifida corrective surgery is now in its third generation. We're doing laser vascular surgery for twins. And just a few weeks ago, up at Boston Children's Hospital, they actually did vascular brain surgery of a baby
Mm.
that was diagnosed with a condition called a Galen malformation. Half of these kids get really sick when they deliver, and of those that get sick, half of them die. Yet they were actually able to correct it in the womb. So if we can do blood transfusions, open heart surgery, spina bifida corrective surgery, even brain surgery, then clearly these are patients. And one thing that's really important to remember is that the mom is a patient and the baby is a patient. They are individuals. In fact, with the open heart surgery that was performed at the Cleveland Clinic, the mom had her own anesthesiologist. The baby had a
Mm.
tumor in its heart called a teratoma. So mom has her anesthesiologist. The mom received an epidural, and so she was comfortable, just like if she was having a C-section done. The obstetrician made an incision in the skin of her belly, just like with the C-section, then made an incision in the womb, her uterus, brought out the baby's right hand and left hand and had them exposed to look at the baby's chest where the heart tumor was. But then they brought in a separate anesthesiologist, a pediatric anesthesiologist that actually started an IV in the baby's hand. Baby was getting fluids, but the baby also was receiving fentanyl for pain and Norcuron, so a paralytic, so the baby wasn't moving around. When I'm doing a hysterectomy, the uterus does not get its own anesthesiologist. The
Mm.
mom gets an anesthesiologist that I'm doing the surgery on, but because the uterus is part of the mom, you don't have to have a separate anesthesiologist. The baby is a totally separate person, separate nerve fibers, neurologic and sensory systems. So the baby had its own anesthesiologist. The heart surgery was performed. The chest was then closed. The IV was taken out. This was at 27 weeks gestation. They then tucked the arms back in, closed the uterus, closed the skin, and 10 weeks later, the baby actually was delivered at 37 weeks gestation. So, more than half of the states now have patients' bills of rights where patients are entitled to respect and bodily integrity and autonomy, and looking at what would the patient want in this situation. So if they are a patient, they are a person, and clearly we've always known that they were unique in the image of God and created in the image of God at that moment of conception. But now we not only have centers that are performing surgery on these babies, but insurance is paying for these procedures. Medicaid in all the states is paying for these procedures. So they are clearly patients, and they need our defense and our protection because they are the most vulnerable patients that we have.
Well, and this was the big idea I took away from your presentations, in that I think many Christians would have the argument, it's not the mother's body, it's the baby's body. You have to consider both, but that medicine treats that baby, and also some of these surgeries are being performed on kind of in the Roe decision, like pre-viability,
Yeah.
um, and and they would not even have the protection of our laws. Yet here we are doing spinal surgery, heart surgery, brain surgery on them, but it just puts an exclamation point behind the very obvious fact that this is another person, separate genetics. And I thought that was not an argument that I've heard a lot in public life. And I think something that every pro-life advocate, every pastor, concerned Christian needs to know, and kind of be able to reiterate in their sphere of influence. And so I was really excited to hear that. And that's behind that statement: a patient is a person, no matter how small. You've mentioned several of the types of surgeries. You had an explanation of the spina bifida surgery that I would like to dig into a little bit more. And I think there have been maybe 4 iterations of this. And in your presentation, you showed a picture of, I believe, a baby kind of reaching out of the womb,
Yeah.
holding on to the doctor's finger. And so I don't know if you could maybe dig into a little bit more of the details. And I think that was like generation 1, and it's now all the way to
Correct.
generation 4. So if you wouldn't
Generation
mind
three.
jumping into that. Oh, generation 3.
Yeah,
Okay.
Vanderbilt University was conducting a trial on spina bifida surgery, and they were looking to see if they took the initiative to repair the defect in the baby's spine in the womb rather than waiting till after the baby was delivered and then repairing it. Would we have better long-term outcomes for the babies that had the surgery repaired? The picture you're talking about was taken by a gentleman named Michael Clancy. The baby's name was Samuel Armas. Samuel was in a trial, a clinical trial at Vanderbilt University, where they made an incision in the womb and they aligned the baby's spine so that they could have access to the defect to repair it. And while they were preparing for the surgery, the baby actually stuck his hand out through that opening in the uterus. That
Mm.
picture was taken, and then the baby underwent that surgery. Well, what's interesting is that baby 8 years later came to meet me when I was speaking at
Oh,
an
wow.
event at Georgia Right to Life. And it was great to meet him. And he wanted to meet me. He goes, "You use my picture all the time. I got to meet his parents."
Wow.
And got to see him, and that was back in 1999. So I also have pictures of him,
Oh,
that when he was driving. He's a grown
wow.
guy. He's now 24 years old. We kind of think, oh, that was what, 8, 10 years ago, but that was back in 1999. But that was an open surgery. We made an incision actually in the uterus. And the second generation is they're actually, using a scope, a fetoscope, a laparoscope, where with a scope and instruments, and they can go through smaller holes and with cameras on the inside, actually repair the defects in the baby's spine there. And what they have found looking at the data as they follow these kids that had the procedure done while they were in the womb, when they followed them 10 years later and they compared them to the babies who had the procedure done after they were born, the babies that had the procedure in the womb could go upstairs faster, downstairs faster. They had better control of their bladders, better control of their bowels. We have actually improved the quality of life of these kids, now adults, for the rest of their lives by treating them
Wow.
as a patient in the womb. Now, generation 3, they're actually using stem cells. At UC Davis, Dr. Farmer is actually going in. She just got another grant for $20 million, where they actually will take stem cells that were harvested from placentas that had already done their job and the baby had delivered. And they're applying these stem cells on a little patch, and they're applying it directly to the defect on the baby's spine in the womb. It's referred to as the CURE trial, CURE, because it doesn't just look like a treatment for spina bifida, but it truly might be a cure for spina bifida. It's just one more amazing
Mhm.
example of how we treat the preborn as patients. And then there's one story that is great that we need to have we want to give people tools that they can use in conversations to defend the preborn. We know this is a spiritual battle, but if we have opposition that doesn't look at scripture as an authoritative source, then we can't jump in with Genesis 126 or Psalm 139. And the event is called a delayed interval delivery. And this occurs when you have a set of twins, and they might even be identical twins, where you had one egg and one sperm that unified, and you have a new person. And before day 13, that early pregnancy divides into two identical copies. Well, sometimes, and we had a case here in Pensacola where a mom will present in preterm labor, and this mom was visiting for a concert and she broke her bag of water, was brought to our hospital, and before we could do anything, she delivered baby A. Baby A was taken to our neonatal intensive care unit and has all the doctors, nurses, and technology. Baby B's bag of water was still intact, and
Huh.
baby B was kept on the inside. What does that allow us to do? It allows us to give the mom some steroids. Steroids can protect the baby's brain, protect the baby's bowels, start to mature the baby's lungs, really giving the baby a little bit of a head start. I mean, the best place for a baby to be is actually in the womb, as long as that environment is the best place compared to, say, a nursery. There have been cases where not only do we get hours with baby B in the womb or days, there was one case where I read they got 6 weeks between identical twin A and identical twin B. You could have
Mm.
one twin born in June, one twin born in August. And I mean, they could be in different school years, but the significance, the science and the medicine is really cool. But here's the thing that we can apply to the issue of life. The baby that's in the NICU that is 100 yards
Wow.
away has all
Wow.
the
Yeah.
rights and protection that you or I would have in the cardiac care unit. Yet its identical twin conceived from the same egg, the same sperm that just happens to be 100 yards in a different geographic location does not have those rights. And if mom were to choose, she could go to one of the pro-abortion states like my home state of New Jersey or New York, and she could legally abort baby B, even though baby A has legal protection. It makes no sense at all. They are patients, whether our geographic location does not give us our rights nor deny us our rights.
Wow. Wow. That is such a powerful story. I had not heard that before. It's certainly something I would be using in the future. I imagine you get questions often about Down syndrome and that being kind of a leading reason why parents are not just maybe they make the decision, but they're even kind of pressured to make the decision to abort. Are there any kind of recent stats, or what is your general response to that issue?
It really depends on the geographic area and the desire of the physician to provide support. Years ago, Iceland came out and Iceland said that they had almost eliminated Down syndrome from their population. Well, how do you eliminate a condition which is genetic, which happens at the moment of conception? Well, Iceland was using a test called a panorama test, which is a blood test from the mom that, at as early as 7 weeks after conception, you can do this blood test and you can 99% accurately diagnose Down syndrome. Well, Iceland wasn't finding a cure. They were just aborting the babies that were
Hmm.
diagnosed with Down
Wow.
syndrome. So, what do we do when we have a patient that is diagnosed with a baby with Down syndrome? One, we provide them support. They're scared. They don't know what they're going to be dealing with. We have support groups in town, moms and dads with a baby that they have raised with Down syndrome, and they provide that support. And they say, "We're going to be here for you. We will help you through that." And then you have to think about Jesus, where the Pharisees asked Jesus about the man who was born blind. What sin did his parents commit? What did they do wrong? And the answer was that, well, he healed him, but he also said so that the glory of God could be made manifest. These are still individuals created in the image of God. Look at all of us. I mean, all of us have some sort of an abnormality. And are we going to eliminate everything that just doesn't conform to the perfect quote unquote,
Mhm.
child and just saying we're going to abort that? No, so that the works of God can be made manifest. I've even had patients that had been diagnosed with babies, and we've diagnosed them where there was something wrong that most likely the baby was not going to survive from. And we counseled them. And it's a lot more effort, but we said we're going to be there for you. We're going to provide the support for you and your family, not just during the pregnancy, not just during the delivery, but as much time as you need afterwards. And we counseled them and said, you are your baby is probably not going to survive labor and probably will not survive if the baby survives until shortly thereafter. All three patients delivered their babies. All three patients'
Wow.
babies passed away. But what we learned was that they were able to love their baby, hug their baby, kiss their baby. There was one baby that we had diagnosed with a teratoma. A teratoma is a tumor, and this happened to be on the baby's face, and it went from the bottom of the chin all the way up to the forehead. We had one center in Colorado who said, "We'll try to fix this," but she broke her bag of water before we were able to get her out there. So
Oh
she
man.
broke her water, she went into labor. And I learned an amazing lesson. I sat with the parents and they had the grandparents. They had aunts, uncles, all sorts of other people that
Mm,
were there in the room. And I let them know kind of that, when we deliver this baby, you're not going to see what you would identify as a normal face. It's going to, be very different. It's going to be very vascular, and all you're going to see is this tumor. If you were looking through a medical text and you're looking page by page, you would probably see that picture of that baby and just flip to the next page because it just did not look like a baby's face. We delivered the baby passed away. But then what I realized is that for hour after hour, that family was holding that baby, passing that baby around, kissing that baby, taking pictures. There was something very different because this baby was family. They saw
mm,
beyond, just like when you have I have a friend who is a burn victim, and you look beyond the appearance and the burns. And you really focus on the person on the inside. And for hour after hour, the nurses even called and they said, they are still hugging and kissing that passed away baby. I said, they will know when the time is been passed. So it's a matter of taking that extra time to counsel the families, provide them the support that they need, let them know they're not going to go through this alone, that there are lots of resources available. I mean, is it the harder way? Sure. But if you get diagnosed with cancer, you don't want somebody to say, look, this is just not going to work out well. It's going to be surgery, radiation,
yeah.
chemotherapy. Your life just isn't worth my time. No, you
Mm,
want that person who says, I'm going to be there with you. We're going to provide the best
mm.
resources for you, and we're going to do the best that we can. That's supposed to be the art of medicine, to go above and beyond. And that's what we should be doing to protect and defend the preborn patients in the womb.
Well, such a powerful story. And I think of my wife's cousin who has Down syndrome. And anytime I'm around him, he is just a light and a source of joy to everyone in the room. And this is why I hope long term, and it may take a generation, but that our argument that each person is made in the image of God and inherently valuable, that ultimately it wins out in the moral discussions we have. Because I sat through most of the discussion about the life bill in the state of Indiana, and about half of our states have now passed something along those lines. And I think a lot of states had the same kind of moral argument back and forth. Well, one of the arguments I heard, I was just astounded by somebody that I respect. But the argument was essentially that a lot of these kids are going to be born, they're not going to have a strong maternal bond. They may be abused themselves. They're going to be hungry. They're probably going to end up in a life of crime. And then the person just stopped, and I was just thinking, so we kill them? Like,
I know.
that person doesn't have the option to make that choice for themselves. Like that doesn't make any sense. But with this argument that we have to have the right to terminate a pregnancy, that is essentially what we're saying. And what I love about what you're sharing is that even though that baby was only alive for a few minutes, perhaps, that family reflected that that was a person made in the image of God, and they deserve the protection of our laws and the best that the medical community could provide. So I just so appreciate that story.
Oh, sure.
I was
And I'll
Go
tell
ahead.
you one thing about all three parents. When we met with the parents 6 weeks afterwards, and one of these parents was actually a nurse anesthetist. Her job is to put people to sleep before a surgery. All three of the parents 6 weeks later, I mean, it was rough. We went to the funeral of one of those babies with with
Mm,
the family.
wow.
All
Wow.
three of those parents expressed their appreciation that we, said, we're going to be there with you. We're going to support you, even though we probably are not going to have a good outcome. The nurse that was an anesthetist, she says, I had felt that baby moving around inside of me. Because I couldn't imagine me going into an operating room, somebody else putting me to sleep, a procedure being done, waking up, and then that baby that had just been moving inside of me was all of a sudden gone. I would never have had a chance to see that baby, hold that baby, love that baby. She goes, Yes, it was a challenge, She says, "But I'm so appreciative that I got to see my baby, hold that baby, and then get family together, and then to have her doctor show up with his wife and a daughter to attend the funeral of that baby." That had value, I mean, that's why we all got there, just to appreciate that value that wasn't here on this earth long enough, but it was still someone created in the image of God at the moment of conception that the mom had felt, had bonded with, and we needed to say goodbye to pass that baby on.
Wow, it's such a powerful story. So as we're kind of winding down here, and I just appreciate all of these stories, I could listen to them all day. Uh, I was wondering how the Dobbs decision perhaps has affected your ministry. Certainly, being in Florida, I know that the Florida Supreme Court has taken up, I think, the 15-week abortion ban,
Yeah.
maybe last week. But more specifically, I mean, you're speaking to CareNet, perhaps one of the largest pregnancy care center movements. They're a national group. You're speaking a lot of national uh, groups that work on the sanctity of life as well. And I have been sharing with church leaders, especially in Indiana, because we just passed a life law. Our Supreme Court upheld it. That it's kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity, at least within 50 years here, for the church to really step up and be the church and care for others. But I was just wondering how perhaps that decision may have impacted your ministry and the message that you're sharing around the country.
Sure. Well, we shifted from focusing on one court, the U.S. Supreme Court, when Roe versus Wade was the law of the land. And 49 years later, the Dobbs decisions, it was overturned. And there were good points and there were new challenges. And we've really gone from focusing on one court to really 50 different courts in 50 different states. Yes, there are some states that have seen dramatic reductions in the number of abortions, but they have new needs for babies that are being born. And so we need to meet those needs of those moms and those babies and actually all those dads as well. But then we have the other states that have just gone to the extreme other side, and they are
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
providing abortions at any gestational age. The Hyde Amendment is null and void in a lot of these conditions. They're providing the abortion pill even at the college and university level through their
mm,
student health societies. So, and they're really putting moms at risk, especially with the abortion pill, which is now in a lot of states available mail order. Are there risks to the babies? Yeah, 98% of the time when a mom takes the abortion pill, the baby dies. Well, what about risks to the moms? Well, one of the biggest risks is with an ectopic or a tubal pregnancy. The number one pregnancy related cause of death of moms in the first trimester of pregnancy is still a ruptured tubal pregnancy. And a tubal
mm,
pregnancy occurs at least every 1%, possibly even up to 2% of the time. So when a mom has a positive pregnancy test, number one, she doesn't know how far along she is, but she also does not know if that pregnancy is in the womb. When she is given the abortion pill, and she is told
mm.
you're going to have bleeding, cramping, and pain.
Oh wow.
And she says, okay, well, what if it's that 1% that is an ectopic pregnancy? What are the symptoms of an ectopic pregnancy? The exact same: bleeding,
Mm,
cramping, and pain. So we're already seeing cases where moms have taken the abortion pill. The pregnancy was not in the womb, it was in the tube, and the abortion pill is not a cure for an ectopic pregnancy. And they are then foregoing, seeking medical help because they think, well, this is what they told me to expect. It's just bad medicine. So in the short term, we need to have the FDA say, "Know what? This is not something that should be available mail order and without a visit."
that's a great talking point on that particular issue. And we are seeing in states that have passed the bans, a lot of individuals going out of state, in our particular case over to Illinois, where they're, my understanding, building big facilities on the border to deal with this. So it's certainly a new day. And I think we have to be prepared to make the arguments about mifepristone and even other drugs perhaps in the future. So, Dr. Lyle, I've shared a couple questions with you, and so appreciate it. I just wanted to pass it to you if you have anything that perhaps I haven't asked about that you thought it would be helpful for pro-life Christians to know about.
Sure. Well, number one, it's great to have obstetricians involved. There's an organization called APLOG, which has over, oh, it's 7,000 members. These are
Wow.
pro-life OBs. It's great having pro-life legislators and governors and members of the House and the Senate. But this is at its core a spiritual battle because this abortion is an attack against the image of God. So the leader really needs to be our pastors. They're our spiritual leaders and guides. If your church has not had a message on not only abortion being wrong, but the healing and redemption that's available through the gospel, you need to encourage your pastor, and then say, hey, we haven't heard a message. We'd love to hear one. This is a spiritual battle. And say, we as a group will support you, to give you the courage to speak as you must. If your pastor says, you know what, we just don't discuss abortion here, you have to really think, is this the church that I want to be raising my kids? Is this where I want them to be learning the values? Because this should be, other than sharing the gospel, I can't think of any other issue that would be number two better than the defense of life. Created in the image of God, we are attacking the image of God. We've lost the lives of 63 million babies in the womb, and there is a punishment for that. But there's also healing and redemption. I mean, God loved us all enough that he sent his son, lived a perfect life, gave his life, and then conquered death for us. And when you look at Psalm 51:5, we were sinners from the moment we were born. And then the psalmist says, we were sinners from the moment our mothers conceived us. So that gospel was sent out of love for the preborn as well. And we have millions of moms and dads who need healing. Healing comes from forgiveness, and true forgiveness only comes from Christ. So it needs to be a message to the church, because between 18 and 24% of all the men and women in our church have personally been involved in an abortion, and they are hurting and they need healing.
Just a couple points of emphasis there. One is, if you're a new listener to the podcast, you may not be familiar with Serena and Bruce Dixon, who's on the podcast here recently. They have an abortion recovery, a ministry called She Found His Grace and He Found His Grace. And I think they just speak so well to this idea of, they personally experienced with abortion, found God's grace, and they're sharing it with others. But then just the emphasis on speaking up about the issue in your own context, and wanted to put a plug in. If you're a pregnancy care center leader, I imagine Bill is booked out quite a bit into the future in high demand, but I can't think of a better speaker to come in and just breathe some fresh life and ideas into a struggle that's been going on for 50 years. And I had a chance to be there in DC when they had oral arguments on Dobbs. There were about 600-700 people in the room, all people that had poured their life and ministry into the life issue. And as the attorneys came out and we had, heard reports from the court, it was just the electricity in the room was like, we may get this done. We may actually overturn this. And so it was such a unique day. I remember the rest of my life. But as I left there, I was thinking, but now we have to go to the next chapter. We have to prepare for the next long fight to continue. It'll be a new day, different laws, different challenges. We have to be prepared for it. And so I want to just put that plug in there for your leader, to have Dr. Lile in to share more about what he's talked about today. So Bill, if you had
and you can
billboard,
freely get a hold of us. You can freely get a hold of us. You have questions. We didn't have a whole lot of time to cover everything, but you can contact us through our website, which is prolifedoc.org, and we'd be happy to point you towards resources and try to assist you.
That's great. I was going to ask the best way to get in contact. And so I love the website, has a lot of great resources. I certainly recommend there. So if you had a billboard on which you could put a message to the broader church, the gospel preaching church, what would you put on it?
I would have a picture of one of the procedures that we're performing, like the open heart procedure, which has the baby with actually an IV in it. I mean, the pictures are astounding. You see this tiny little hand with an IV in it, and just say, a patient is a person, no matter how small. Patients have rights. And it just really speaks for itself.
Amen. Amen. Well, I'm so grateful for your ministry. I'm grateful that God called you into this, and you are not only speaking out around the country, but you're also doing the hard work of this yourself right there in Pensacola, Florida. And so that example is encouraging to me personally. I think it's easy sometimes to think about, okay, if I get a platform and I can just go speak everywhere, that kind of excuses me from doing the hard work of disciple making and speaking into our own sphere of influence. And so I appreciate, even in your own life, that you've you're balancing that somehow. I'm not sure, but just grateful for your influence.
Oh, it's an honor it's all about kingdom service. We're here for 80, 90 years if we're blessed, and then we spend eternity, in heaven with our Lord. And we all want to look back and think, how did I serve the kingdom and promote good, doctrine and fellowship? And we want to hear the words of Jesus to look us in the eye and say, well done, thou good and faithful servant.
Amen. Well, we'll be praying for you and your ministry. Thank you so much for joining us today to share
Thank you.
about your work and about the importance of the sanctity of life.